Recently I covered Fashion Week and it is jam-packed. It's a week-long event full of fashionistas, bloggers, photographers, all sorts of people there to look at the clothes. So here's how I went about covering it this week. You need to get there early. So the earlier you can get there, the better, because you need to get a prime spot. A prime spot for me is generally somewhere as close to the middle as possible. You want the models looking right at you, and they generally do if they're walking right down the middle of the runway. The reason you want to get there early is that you could do a lighting test. You can see what your shutter's going to be, what your aperture's going to be, how bright the scene is, how dark. A good little tip is to find the lighting guy for the place and say, hey, what's the color temperature of this place? And he'll be able to give you a Kelvin number, which is pretty darn close. And if it isn't close, you can just sort of bump it a little bit and tweak it that way. I like to bring two cameras. One camera has a 70 to 200 millimeter lens on it. I will be using that lens probably 85% of the time. That lens lets you have pictures from a long ways away, and it also lets you get a couple detail shots once the models are closer to you. On the second camera, I like to have a little fun with it, so you can use a wide angle lens like a 16-35. I also like to use some prime, 85-1.2, which although a lot harder to use because the focusing is so precise, sometimes when you get it right, it just looks fantastic, blows away that background real nice. For the most part, you'll be shooting verticals. The designer has put out a look, and you need to shoot the entire look so people can see head to toe, the shoes, the bags, whatever else they may be wearing. But for me, I need to think about the newspaper's print edition, I need to think about the blog, I need to think about our live streaming, and sometimes horizontal pictures work way better on the web than a vertical can. When it comes to that, you need to shoot a little bit tighter with your 70-2. You need to do a little waist up, sometimes just a head if they're wearing a sort of hat or a hood or something. Something that makes it a little bit different than just a straight up vertical photo. You also want to think about aperture, shutter, and your focus mode. In terms of aperture, I like to use 3.5 to f4. That gives me enough range to get the clothes and also get the model's faces nice and sharp. Then you want to think about shutter speed. Now you don't want a really slow shutter speed because then you're going to get blurring in your photos. You want a nice and fast 500, 400, anything above that would be great. You want the clothes nice and crisp, and the shutter speed is going to really affect that. It's going to freeze them right at the perfect time for you. You also want to think about how you're going to focus. I like to use follow focus at Fashion Week. You hit the button, the models are coming, they get closer, the camera's still focusing, you can shoot nice and tight, and that way all you think about is hitting the shutter, getting that perfect shot. But don't forget, sometimes pictures happen outside of that small bubble you're in. You need to go backstage, you need to wander outside, you need to look everywhere else besides the runway. Even if it's just for 30 minutes, give yourself that time to challenge yourself, try and make a different picture. For thestar.com, I'm Carlos Osorio.